the home market is really going through a big question mark phase, because the home market's been through periods of distortion going back this whole century that have really been exceptional. I can't think of any time in our nation's history that the housing market has been as crazy as it's been over a generation. So you go back to after the turn of the century, and we got into a phase of enormous overbuilding of homes in the United States and speculative buying, as there was a lot of corruption in the banking industry, and there were incentives for the banks to write as many loans as they could and be able to sell off all the risk of those loans, even if they were doing what they knew were liar's loans. People were encouraged to put down false information to be approved, and people were allowed to buy unlimited numbers of homes without any documentation of income and no down payment. So the builders kept building, the lenders kept lending, and it was almost like a giant Ponzi scheme that collapsed starting in 2007, led to the horrific Great Recession, massive unemployment in the country, the bankers involved in all the illegal activity. Virtually no one ever went to prison. But what did happen is the standards for lending changed enormously. Housing hit its bottom about 2012, I guess, and then had a crazy run up from 2012 to earlier, really last year. And when the housing bust happened, starting in 2007, a huge percent of the houses in the United States were built by small independent builders that would build 5 houses a year, 10, 20. A big one might build 100. But those builders overwhelmingly exited the building business, and they accounted for a big chunk of the housing built in the U.S. So what we've been left with from when housing really got going again in 2012 through 21 was large publicly traded, what are known as production builders. And they have their formulas, and they steadily built bigger houses at higher price points in these big developments, and they ignored the areas that the smaller builders would build in, which a lot here, a lot there, 5 lots somewhere else. They weren't building hundreds or thousands of homes in a development. So we lost a big segment of what created housing in the United States, and particularly what were known as starter homes, homes for an individual or a couple or a family buying their first home. We went from having way too many homes built in the United States the first decade of this century to too few for household formations being built in the second decade of this century. And the housing market prices were being pushed up as well, and demand was being pushed up by ultra-low interest rates that were brought into place by the Federal Reserve to defeat us going into a Great Depression. Because when the banking scandals erupted and became like an infection around the world, the U.S. and many other economies were facing the possibility of another Great Depression. And we only ended up with a Great Recession because of all the manipulations of money by the Federal Reserve, killing off any money you could earn as a saver, holding down interest rates on any kind of borrowing to reflate the economy. Well, now we go through the COVID cycle and we end up with inflation. The Federal Reserve has to go full bore into fighting inflation that's been magnified by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And so now the interest rates on mortgages are in the 6s, potentially the 7s, and the economics of the home prices we've had don't work at those rates. So what we're going to see is a lot of people who have very low rates are going to stay in place. But what happens if, let's say it's an estate sale? Someone has passed away and the house has to be sold. Or somebody relocates from one part of the country to the other and they need to sell the house they're in order to be able to go somewhere else. Or there are various circumstances, could be a divorce, situations where somebody has got to sell a house in today's environment. What happens is where home prices were going up, 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 and up, now they've leveled off. Some markets, they've actually declined some, and there's softness in the deals, meaning that as a buyer, the shoe's now on the other foot. Where you were at the mercy of the seller, today you have power as a buyer. So as home prices kind of meander along as we move through the next couple of years, it means that the relative affordability of homes will improve, and the interest rates, the higher interest rates we have right now because of inflation, ultimately when inflation is under control, we're not going to see mortgage rates go back to, people getting mortgages with the best credit, with the first digit being a 1, a lot of people first digit being a 2, but we are going to see rates come back down from where they've escalated to. So here's the play. Home prices soften somewhere. Somebody's got to sell. You've been frustrated trying to buy a home. You see an opportunity where the price is now more reasonable. You suck it up and you take on that higher mortgage rate. The ultimate play, though, is that down the road, I don't know if it's 18 months from now, 2 years from now, but mortgage rates almost certainly come back down. You refi, you have that price you paid for the home that's lower because of these higher rates, and then later on you refi. So it's all about whether or not the payment at this higher rate just stings a little, but you can handle it. You don't want to go into one, though, that would eat your wallet up. So this is a long explanation, longer than I would normally give, but I want to give the historical perspective. How we got to where we are today is because of a lot of external circumstances that you and I didn't cause, but we have to deal with and pivot because of those. And you know what? The economy always works like that. We have to be flexible based on the circumstances we're presented. And the housing market right now is a tough one because we got used to a certain interest rate environment. But that interest rate environment, remember, that fed into the rapid escalation of prices that now is over, and that creates the next wave of potential for buyers.